email deliverability basics. Email deliverability is the art, mostly art, somewhat of a science of ensuring our emails actually land in inboxes of the recipients, not bouncing, getting caught by spam filters, quick promotions, and so on. Bunch of stuff that kind of applies to it and affects it. So proper technical setup is one of them. DNS, ESP. Does anyone know what ESP stands for? You want to speak up? No?
Email service provider.
Nice. We'll talk about that. Healthy sending practices. So that's domain reputation, volume pacing, reply rates, a bunch of other stuff, which we'll talk about. And then also recipient engagement, obviously. Email service provider is the only one we'll touch on this page. So that's kind of the primary server that your emails get routed through. The big ones are obviously Google, Microsoft. There's some tertiary ones like Zoho or Hotmail, whatever weird people also use. And then you have something called private SMTPs, which is SMTP stands for single mail transfer protocol. It's just how email is transferred over the web essentially. But you in theory can use your computer to set up a private email server if you wanted to. So you have full control over it. The downside being it's not really as regulated or well known in the industry. So by default, you actually are kind of lower on the sending scale because for the most part, everyone trusts Google or Microsoft. You can't really screw them too much because you're within like certain limitations of what you can do. So all three can be used. Private SMTP generally isn't used too much. We use it here and there for niche cases, but it's just much more dangerous to use for the most part. Okay, go next slide. So we'll start with DNS, domain name system. All this basically means is kind of how things get received at your end. Like imagine sending mail and actually putting on the mail who the sender is, what your address is, who the recipient is, and bringing it to the mail. Okay. So there's a couple that are super important that we have to always think about. SPF and MX are very basic. If you don't have these, you can't send or receive for the most part. So there's nothing special about these. Don't flaunt these on sales calls. They're just basic ones that you have to have set up. The two that are important for pretty much everyone with specifically cold email to is DKIM, which is domain keys identified mail. And what that is, it's just like a secured handoff, almost like having something tracked when you're sending mail, for example. So it's just you authenticating that this is legit. You have a key that you get kind of between Google and your ESP, or usually like GoDaddy and your ESP, and they're interlinked. So the email itself looks more safe. This doesn't mean it's going to always get through. It's just a very basic authentication check. You know, it's like not drinking when you get pulled over. Still might get a ticket, but at least you won't go to jail. And then DMARC, you don't really do much with it. All it is for reporting and conformance. So you set it up, and then essentially what will happen is you're going to get a report sent to an email every week of everything that's gone through, how many emails have been sent, what went to spam. You don't have to actually monitor it, but having it set up kind of checks off a checkbox that lets the sender or the receiver know that you are actually monitoring your emails to some extent. So you look somewhat more reputable. So mostly for the sales team, these are super basic. I wouldn't talk about these too much because anybody who has a brain and cold email does these. So it's just in case people ever ask you about them. This is just not something that differentiates us from other people. Just to be clear, like if I was technical and you started explaining these to me for 20 minutes, I would probably just leave the call because you're wasting my time. So just gauge it on the client, obviously.
For the sales team targeting brick and mortar businesses, the chances that you're interacting with someone who's ever even run any outbound marketing previously is very low. So you always want to do an audit for that. But generally, when people hear that we have levels of sophistication to our system outside of I build list of 10,000 people, put it in MailChimp, hit send, when they realize there's actually a process to that, they'll be very much impressed, or it will build trust.
Cool. Next. Okay. Mailbox warmup. So it's just a screenshot of it instantly. I wasn't going to go too crazy here. Mailbox warmup. I'm sure most of you guys understand what it is. It's basically just a network that you create within a platform. So instantly, for example, we'll have everybody that subscribes to it, plus a bunch of extra emails that they just throw in there to have a bigger pool. And it simulates organic interactions. So your email is going to send some like, hey, John, how are you today? Did you watch the football game? It doesn't even make sense half the time. And then they will automatically respond back to you. You don't see them because they use a tag in the subject, which just filters them out, like by a filtering rule. Very, very important though. Like the absolute minimum is 2 weeks that you have to do, because this shows some interaction before you start sending cold email, which don't get as high reply rates as you organically would, right? Sending business emails out. And you can also scale them appropriately. So having a ramp where you can start with 2, jump to 4, then 6, then 8, rather than you go from 0 emails to 30, which as you can imagine looks very sketch and it's very easy to pick up for a system that just blocks you immediately. Yeah, again, natural sending pattern. So we do use a ramp with it. Initially, we'll go from usually increments of 2, I think, over 2 weeks. And we top out of, what is it, release at 25 or 30 warm-up emails for the
It's
ramp?
5 per mailbox for Google, and then it's 5 per mailbox for Microsoft.
Yeah. So the numbers are based on how much you'll actually be sending. So we'll scale to 25. Once we start sending, the actual active sending will also ramp. So it's going to start lower. But again, to stay within the natural sending pattern, we'll immediately drop the warm-up down to 10. So the curve kind of goes up and then it comes down and goes up again as the active sending increases. But the total sending volume of warm-up and active sending, which are all considered, never goes higher than like 30 for us. The reason you want to keep it active is having warm-up going, A, is just good for you regardless. But let's say you're getting no replies at all on 20 of your active emails that are sending. If you're still having 10 warm-up emails sending and you're getting 80% reply rates there, your overall reply is still somewhat healthy. Whereas otherwise, you're only relying on your active email sends. So super important in the beginning. We have to do it. Some companies do it for 2 weeks. I don't think that's enough. 3 or 4 is usually a much safer way to go. But you also do maintain warm-up later on. It just stops ramping. It stays static. And we mostly focus on the send patterns. Any questions on this? Cool. Instantly, by the way, has a warm-up score that you guys will see. It's pretty much garbage. All that means is like how many emails have gone to spam out of 100. What Instantly will do is it'll pull your emails out of spam, which is actually a good engagement interaction cycle, which I'll talk about. So it looks very good because it means they tried sending it to spam to see if you actually belong there. Someone pulled it out, so they actually kind of raise your score. But it's not the end all be all. So having a high score on Instantly can often be a false positive. But if you have a really bad score, it's generally a bad indicator. It's just you having 100% doesn't always mean your emails are in a good space. Cool. Okay, engagement and interaction signals. So the next layer, as you guys can see, there's a ton of layers to this, right? Like there's a lot of ways to get blocked when it comes down the chain, going to spam, and they all matter. We have the basic setup, but then it kind of interacts longer on depending on how your email is perceived, depending on replies, conversations, clicks, spam reports, and so on. That's why having a high reply rate is pretty important. So across the industry, people are fine with 1 to 2%, but that's because they very much run a burn and turn methodology, which we don't do. So we try to stay above 5% reply rate. That combined with our warm-ups, it puts us in this pretty solid range where there's interactions going, we're replying to not interested, which is why that's also important, right? The interactions are tracked. So all that contributes to more people are conversing with you. The back end naturally assumes that that means there's value to your emails receiving or landing in the inbox. So it's going to keep happening. Complaint rates, obviously in spam rescue. So you going to spam is bad for you. You getting sent to spam is pretty much the worst thing that can happen. Someone actively marking you spam will immediately trigger and get you flagged. But you getting rescued is a good thing. So if someone ever mentions that you're in spam, asking to be pulled out of spam is a great move because it has a massive impact. That's why the warm-up pool also does that for you automatically. Opens are tracked. So opens and interactions are tracked by Google for sure. And what I mean is not the open rates that we track, but they track it on their backend. So the more time, just how YouTube tracks how much you watch a video, right, for watch time, they track how much you interact with an email. If you're going over it again, all of this to see, again, another pattern to see, is it worth sending emails to you? But it's also to avoid bots from interacting with each other. So warm-up pools will have advanced features also that like mimic interaction. So they'll have a cursor like moving around the page, pretending like it's interacting, which is very beneficial and obviously important. So people opening the email, even though we don't track it, still very beneficial to us, even if they don't reply. And the last one, which we'll talk about more next week, is just registration lifetime. And that doesn't mean how long the domain has been used total, but how long it's been registered under your name, obviously. So if we bought it last month, that means the domain has been alive for a month, and it's going to be very heavily considered when emails are received. Obviously, to combat cold emails, right? Like people buy new domains, spam a bunch of people for 3 months and close them out. So off the bat, when your emails are new, you're scrutinized very, very heavily, which is why we have to be very careful with copy, with the ramp that we use, with conversations early on. And if your email ends up living or domains end up living for 6 to 12 months and have been sending healthy, a spam report also has a much, much smaller impact on you than it would if you were a month old, right? Just how you getting into a company after 3 years is not as big of a deal as missing 3 days when you've been here for a week. That's pretty much it for the most part. Most of this is an art. Okay. Like the other stuff, kind of, you could call it a science. All of this is very assumptive. And we just know this based off of seeing how much replies impact our results long-term. We don't know exact numbers. We're just guessing, but we know it kind of works. Cool. And then last slide. Okay. Cold email sending approaches. This is a ChatGPT, whatever image. So I don't know. Don't trust it too much. The most common approach I would say in the industry is burn and turn. Buy a ton of emails, send quantity because it is a numbers game at the end of the day to some extent, but you actually never get to a super healthy deliverability metric, if you will. Like you kind of start at 70%, and the better you do, you could in theory get up to 90%, but the easier way is to just max it out, drop down to 40%, replace the emails, go back to 70. It's not very sustainable. It's very expensive because you're killing domains all the time, but you're buying for a year. And it's just tough to track and annoying to work with. So rather than doing that, focusing on quality before increasing quantity is super important for us, because by doing that, we can make sure our reply rates are up, our conversions are up before we increase quantity, so they scale evenly and we don't risk our emails dying. Because having a 5% reply rate of 100 sends, it's not that bad because your volume is low, but the higher your volume goes over a domain, the more you're going to get scrutinized. In theory, if we had like 80% response rate and never went to spam, you could actually send 300 emails per mailbox a day and you'd be fine. It's just not realistic. So you're better off staying in the lower end and scaling it. And that way we can, after 6 months, if a client stays on that long, we can start getting crazy deliverability, hitting Microsoft. We can test a bunch of opens options for us that others don't have while saving us money in the long term. And then obviously the difference in a results floor or ceiling. You guys know what a skill floor or ceiling is? It's kind of like I don't know, probably a gaming term or probably used in business as well. But the idea being that with burn and turn, your floor is much lower because you're sending so much more volume that you're going to inevitably get some results no matter how bad your emails are. Someone's going to reply to you to some extent. Whereas low and slow, your floor is much lower, right? If your copy is all bad and your volume is down, you actually run the risk of getting no results at all. But conversely, your ceiling is actually a lot higher because you have more time to focus on quality, and you can get your deliverability up so high after 3 to 4 months that you can start hitting inboxes that other people couldn't hit at all. So imagine like a big corporation that they have such stringent rules that you're not getting in unless your email is reputable, this, that, has existed for this amount of time, blah, blah, blah. We can now start hitting big people like that, which you could never do with a burn and turn account that you kill after a month. Cool. That's pretty much all for the basics. Just the idea of like us taking on more, we're taking on more risk, but we're focusing on more quality for the client. Most other companies are going to focus on quantity to get them quick results, get them over with. Whereas we're willing to invest resources and like refresh the copy literally every month, look over all the data. We'd rather get them slower results, burn through way less leads, right? Because you can burn through 10,000 leads in the first 2 months. Your copy was bad. You'll still get 20, but you burn them all.
Right.
Whereas if we'll do it slowly, you can instead hit 2,000 leads, get half the results, but your conversion is so much higher that you have access to way more leads for them.
Yeah. If I was to try to summarize what Dan just shared and kind of the themes of it that I take away in 3 words, it would be methodical, intentional, sustainable.
Yes.
Versus let's just shotgun blast and see what happens.
Yeah.
That's the differentiator.
One thing that resonates well with the clients as well, and we should be mentioning in onboarding for those of you, if just in case you're not. Yeah, basically we take a very data-driven approach, and so our number one priority at the beginning of a campaign is to get and receive enough data where we determine, okay, this data looks good, the numbers are good, reply rates, everything, it looks good. Then we're willing to ramp up sending volume as opposed to using volume to compensate for poor inputs, right? Like just sending 30,000 emails out just so we can get one. Whereas instead, if we take a very data-driven approach and kind of work out those, maybe underperforming sequences or what case may be, but we look at the data, we get there, we get it to a really, really good place. Then we can ramp up to 5,000 sends and get, tons and tons more than just one qualified lead, if that makes sense. And so quality versus quantity.